Hi, everyone. So, Kelly and I have a very interesting topic that we have planned for you today, and it's the topic of imagination and the power of intention. And this is going to be a very exploratory conversation because it's a topic that has been making itself more and more prominent for me in my own life very recently. And I brought it to Kelly a few days ago, and she's totally game, but we're both sort of like, we have no idea where this is going to go, which I think is perfect for this topic. And the reason why this feels very exciting and expansive for me is because I have spent my entire life wanting a sense of direction. I've always felt like I had none. And I was always so envious of people that knew exactly what they wanted to do with their lives, and they could go to school and study something specific and get a job and have a career, and it was very linear. I used to wish that I was good at math so that I could be an accountant, so that I could just go to work, have a good paying job, and just like know exactly what my path would look like. There was something about that that I always really wanted that was never never my journey in this life. And over the course of the last 3 years, the more I have expanded into the spiritual space and the more I've been in contact with my spirit guides, I still didn't have a sense of direction at all whatsoever, but I could feel that I was being guided somewhere, even though I had no idea where it was going. And it still drove me crazy that it was a sense of loss of control that I was searching for that I could never really get my fingers on. And then recently, my whole life kind of came into focus. All the puzzle pieces fit together, and it was like, oh my God, this is where I'm being led. And there was something extremely exciting about that. But inside of suddenly having clarity, I'm realizing where the clarity is coming from. And I'm in the middle of creating something that literally is coming from my imagination. And the reason why I never had a sense of direction before was because I needed to evolve in a way that I could receive that idea. And there's something incredibly magical about creating something from your imagination. And we tend to think of our imagination as this part of our lives that's kind of an escape from reality, where when you're a child, it's all fun and games, and to be inside of your imagination is encouraged to a certain extent. And then at some point along the way, maybe first grade, second grade, maybe a little earlier, depending on the school system that you're in, you're encouraged to start to think more practically and realistically and focus more on problem solving. And especially when you get to high school, it was very prominent inside of my school to start to pick the career that you wanted to have so that you could have a sense of direction and leave the games behind and move into a more practical, logical way of showing up in your life. And when you can do that, we are told that we are more guaranteed to have a stable existence inside of this world. And we are witnessing now that that's not 100% the way it works, and that there are many people that chose the traditional path that are really struggling with stability, both in their
Yeah.
personal lives or financially. And so I'm starting to notice that the imagination is not really what we've been made to believe it is. It's not this fantasy land that's a distraction from reality. Your imagination is an extension of your divine channel. And when you're
Mhm.
open and allowing of being able to tap into it, you can receive guidance and insight for opportunities, clarity, and things to create that you never would have had access to if you're constantly closing yourself off from that. So there's something actually incredibly important about our imagination that facilitates a way of life that is much more expansive and full of possibility than it than we were made to believe that it is.
Yeah. Yeah. Imagination really is like the channel of creativity. And creativity is really just making something new, making something unique. Like that we have those, we all understand we have like the two different parts of our brain, like the more logical, analytical, and then like the more creative and inspired thinking part of our brain. And we tend to resonate a little bit more with one or the other. And some people think they're more analytical based, and some people think they're more in the creative space. And there's probably lots of research behind that. But I think it's interesting to explore this topic around how the way that we're taught to think about future planning or creating a life for ourselves is very much through that practical analytical side, where we are taught to do the thing, to be able to XYZ down the path that other people before us have walked. And that is the path to get to the future that we want, or the future that we should want in some way. But that is inherently limiting. And I think the world is starting to mirror that a little bit more, where it's becoming either more common or just more obvious that the security and the happiness that we were promised was going to come from walking that reliable, quote unquote, path isn't actually accurate. It doesn't actually come. Either it's because we end up having the thing tangibly, like we have the job, we have the money, we have the stable income, but we're not happy. Or we walked that path and we didn't end up having the stability anyways. I mean, life and everything these days seems to be very unpredictable. And like just the state of the world, like things are just not at a level of control that we once thought that they were. We can't control our lives to be anything in particular the same way that we thought that we could in the past, I think. And so this idea of imagination, of being able to create something that's not on the typically walked path, making something new or turning something old into something new, being resourceful and being, again, creative with different ways that we can, as an example, make money or do work or benefit people or give benefit to the world, to contribute to the overall benefit of the world, which is then in turn going to support us in making money for ourselves, et cetera, then we're it's to me it just feels so obvious at this point in life that like that is the pathway to abundance and stability and happiness for so many reasons. One is that like everything that has been wildly successful in the world has come from a creative idea. It came from something unique that was not following any path. It went completely against the grain, right? Like Apple and
Right.
Tesla and all these really big, successful businesses. They were successful not
Amazon,
because they Amazon, thank you. I was like, there's got
Netflix.
to be so many more ideas. Yeah.
Yeah.
Everything was taking something that hadn't already been done and creating it. And that came from ultimately imagination.
There's even like there's I really want to get into this. There's something like very scary about following your imagination. There's an element of that we don't inherently trust. And I see this over and over and over again inside of the context of purpose, right? Inside of the spiritual space. Our episode on finding your purpose has gotten more than double the views of every other one of our episodes. There's something very like tangibly desirable about finding your purpose, at least inside the spiritual space, so that you can
Yeah.
have a sense of direction, so that you can have a sense of clarity, so that you can know where you're going. Can I just say that I feel like I have found mine, or at least I'm still uncovering it, but it took 37 years for me to get here, and it's going to continue to constantly evolve. And I got here by sitting inside of meditation and just being like, what is my next step? Show me a breadcrumb. I was never given the full picture. I was just given snippets. And I was gradually, slowly led to this place that I'm in now. And the idea of finding your purpose also lends itself to the idea that it's out there somewhere. It already exists. what if you haven't found it yet? Because you're going to bring something new into existence. And if you keep looking for it out there somewhere that you have to just find, or some psychic is going to finally tell you what it is,
Uh-huh.
what if that's actually limiting you from turning in and exploring what could I want for me? What could feel really expansive? What could I create in my time here? But there's something really scary about trusting our ability to do that.
Yes. Let's explore what that fear is really all about.
Sure.
Yeah. Like when I tune into it for myself, like it does feel like that lack of trust in myself. It feels like just a lack of safety inside of the unknown, which is a very general way of looking at it. Maybe we can peel back the layers more, but it does very much just feel like there's no proof that this is going to work. And if there's no proof or evidence that this is going to work, that it's worth my time, that it's not going to be a threat to me in some way, and those threats could be threat of judgment, threat of rejection, the threat of failure, the threat of feeling ashamed because I didn't, become successful with this thing that I tried, or, whatever it is, that threat that we associate with the unknown and that just being inherently unsafe for whatever reason. Well, we can trace that back to caveman times where we just had to automatically assume that what we didn't know could hurt us. That was how we survived. And now we just have continued to project that onto everything in our lives, that including things that aren't necessarily true or where it doesn't apply. And in the case of imagination, that feels so unsafe, but when we really explore what we're like what feeling unsafe is, it's like insecurity that I'm not going to be okay, that I might be judged. And those things can equally happen when you're denying yourself imagination or when you're following the path of X to Y to Z to, whatever the path that everyone else has walked, you could still fail. You could still end up in a place of not feeling secure, or being judged, or whatever it is. And I think people are finding that out
Well,
more and more.
I think that the reason why you fear those things is because the fear is already existing there. You know what I mean? Like it's not, if you're fearing creating something new and bringing something new into this world because you're afraid that it's not going to work for you, then what you're really afraid of is what it would mean if you were to see yourself as a failure. And there's probably a part of you that's already feeling that way, and you're just projecting it onto this other thing that you're hoping is going to save you from that feeling. And
That's so true.
if it can't save you, then you're stuck feeling that forever, right? Or what if you never get the idea? That was a big one for me. What if the idea never comes to me? And what if I just keep waiting and searching and longing for it? Well, I'm already feeling those things. And so if I never get the idea, then I have to feel this way forever. So now
Right.
we're projecting this desire to escape who we are from this incredible thing called imagination.
Yeah.
And what if the whole point to being able to create something from your channel, from your imagination, is literally the process of birthing something from you through creation itself? Why does it have to lend itself to any particular outcome?
Yes.
Yeah, so let me use myself as an example. I mentioned that I've found my purpose. I'm in the middle of creating a community. It's free. I'm not charging money for it. I'm not depending on this thing that I've created to support me financially. I'm not depending on this thing that I've created to point to say, I'm successful now. I did the thing. I no longer have to be ashamed of who I am. I no longer have to A, B, C, and D. I'm just feeling very inspired by it. So I'm taking the time to put it out into the world. That's all it is. And so, where is
Yeah.
this expectation coming from that, again, the thing that you're birthing from your imagination is supposed to have a role for you in terms of the thing that you do or the identity that you hold.
Yes. Yeah, we put that expectation on it because we're seeing it as a replacement for the tangible thing. It's like I'm trading this thing that
Yes.
comes with this apparently promised outcome that we can actually see is not actually accurate anyways, but like we have evidence out there for some reason that like if I follow this analytical, logical XYZ step, that I'm going to get this outcome. And so if I'm not going to follow that, I'm going to instead do this weird thing called like trusting the unknown and leaning into my imagination and creating something completely new and unique, then it has to at least as a minimum, come with the same outcome that the other path would have gotten, but that would be minimum. It's supposed to actually have a better outcome. That's the expectation that we put on it, right? If I'm going to abandon this like really familiar and easy to trust, safe path, then it must be so that like I end up becoming a millionaire having created this thing and have all the life financial freedom and whatever. And coming back into this idea of purpose, like we associate purpose as this thing that we do that we like doing that helps people and makes us a lot of money. That's the
Right.
expectation that we have. And we're kind of projecting that onto all of these little leaps of faith that the spiritual path is kind of calling us into, which is of that path of creativity and imagination. And I think we've been exploring this topic through the idea of imagining something through the lens of like career and business. But I think we can also lend this conversation into like where else can imagination be beneficial? And how else can we use this to our benefit in our lives? You mentioned something before we started recording that I thought was really brilliant about um like in the work that I do in the fitness and nutrition industry where most people come to me with a history of having, followed some kind of like A to Z path where it's like you're going to have these macros and follow it at this consistency rate and do these workouts, and then that's going to cause you to lose 1 to 2 pounds a week. And people don't typically question that. They're just like, well, that's the best I can do. That's what that's what I want, because they haven't really given themselves an ability to step back and ask what else they could possibly want more than that. And that's because of the idea of like re setting realistic goals, and that's beneficial in a lot of ways. But when we can peel the layers away from that logical, analytical, like what I'm supposed to want and what I'm supposed to do to get there, in that realm of fitness, health, body, nutrition, etc., you're talking about this idea of being able to imagine beyond that, like just losing 1 to 2 pounds a week and living based on that, like following this consistent plan forever. It's like, what do you actually want? What is actually authentic to you? How can you live a more full life that is beneficial to you in all areas? And this is a lot of the work that I do, even though I haven't thought about it this way necessarily, but it's helping people see like, what is the life that you actually want to be living? And does learning how to lose weight and follow the plan and be really rigid and work out the optimal amount of days per week, is that actually what you want to be doing? And for most people, it's no. They just associate that doing all of that is going to get them out of the pain of the discomfort they feel within themselves. And that feels like the number one priority. But when we can settle that discomfort that we feel within ourselves and do the work to come into wholeness with who we are beyond the conditioning and the stories about ourselves and about our bodies, then we can start to more attune to like what actually makes me happy. What can I pour more of my attention and my energy and my time into that's actually going to fill me up? And for most people, it's not going to be counting macros and being, some nutrition guru that like eats healthy all of the time and has to think about it all the time in order to do that and goes to the gym all of the time. That might be like that probably is going to be a part of it for most people, is living some kind of healthy lifestyle, but they haven't given themselves the opportunity to really imagine how that stuff fits into an overall larger vision for how they imagine themselves living in the most happy and thriving state possible.
I think that there's, again, something very uncomfortable about allowing yourself to sit inside of something bigger. And it's something that we sort of have to reteach ourselves how to do. It feels scary to think big. It feels scary to
Yeah.
sit there and really reflect on what do I really want? And we are so used to following this one dimensional path and looking to other people for evidence of things. Well, what's possible? Oh, let me look at what they're doing. And something that I've noticed with channeling is that all they're really doing when I'm channeling beings of light is playing devil's advocate. That's all it is. And the
Uh-huh.
reason why they're doing that is to try to open your aperture to be able to have a different perspective. Because the more differences in perspective that you can see are available for you, the more you open to new possibility. And we tend to be so narrowly focused on this is my truth and this is my reality and this is how things work and this is right and this is wrong and this is how things should be. And if it's not this way, then it's good. And if it's not this way, it's bad. And it's like, well, what about all this idea? And what about this idea? And where is this idea not 100% true? And how could this other truth also be true for you? And when you can almost retrain yourself to start questioning things and asking yourself open-ended questions, all of the sudden you start to get new ideas. But there's, I think, like a gradual stepping stone process to doing that because at first it feels very scary. It feels very scary to ask a different question because then it's going to bring up discomfort. It's going to bring up a limiting belief that's there. It's going to bring up something about you that you feel ashamed of or something about you that you don't like. And it's going to require that you really sit with that part in order to be able to face that question. And then on the
Mhm.
other side of that question is another question. When I'm in meditation, that's all it is. They're just constantly asking questions and offering me different perspective. And I've gotten
Yes.
used to just doing that for myself.
Being able to
What
see
other
things from,
opportunities available for me? What avenue
yes,
have I not seen yet?
yes. That is like one of the most powerful tools that we can have in our tool belt is the ability to see beyond our automatic limiting perspective on life and everything that happens to us. Because when we are just, going through the motions of life and we're on autopilot, which we're going to be a lot of the time, and to some benefit, because if we had to think about every single decision and everything that we're making and every single day and every moment of every day, that would be exhausting. So in a lot of ways, it's good that we're on autopilot, but it's just that the autopilot programming is usually pretty shit a lot of the time. And I think what tends to happen when people go through the spiritual path and personal development path is that they start to feel the discomfort of their everyday or of moments of their day becomes more palpable, and it's harder to ignore. It's harder to just settle for like this isn't feeling right. And so when we start to realize that we're not comfortable inside of the experience of life that we're having, then we start to question like what is causing this? And when we slow down enough to notice, like, what about certain things in my life, my finances, or my career, or my relationship, or my health, or my relationship with my body, or how I see myself, what about that is so uncomfortable? And then we start to notice what are the automatic stories or belief systems and thoughts that we hold about that specific area of our life. And a big part of this work is being able to recognize what we're telling ourselves or the beliefs that we hold about something, and then be willing to look for what's actually true, to upgrade our perspective or to look at things from a different point of view. And that does require imagination, because if we're not doing that, then we're just living under the premise of what is known and what is familiar. And what's known and familiar for most people causes a lot of suffering. In finances, what's familiar and known for a lot of people is there's never enough money, I'm always struggling, everything is, in lack. it's really hard to make more money. It's really hard to save money. Money always goes away. People are always after my money. When it comes to things with body, what's new and, or sorry, what's familiar and comfortable for people inside of their health and their relationship with their body is that it's not good enough, that it's this specific thing is not attractive, or other people might not find me as attractive because of this, and my value is depreciated because of this part of my body, or whatever it is. If we don't question those stories and are willing to look beyond that automatic limiting perspective, then we're going to continue to live out of the suffering of that area of our life that is so familiar.
You know, I think this was like 5 years ago. I was working out, listening to a podcast, and and I was very focused on the personal training thing at the time. I had just built my business and I wasn't really happy, but I was so focused on, well, this is what I know, this is what I'm educated in. And so you've chosen your path already. You don't know any other skills. So this is what you're stuck with, and you're going to have to make the most of it and just do this thing that you've gone to school for. And I was
Mm-hmm.
listening to this podcast, and this girl just happened to say something along the lines of, you can build the life of your dreams. You can build whatever life you want. And my immediate snap reaction to that was, what is she talking about?
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't believe that she said that. It felt so weird to me to feel like I can build whatever life I want. That's not true. And I had to sit with that for weeks. And now, 4, 5 years later, I can say that I have learned firsthand from personal experience that it's true. But I think the thought is, oh, the ideal will just come to me and then I will build it. I will create it.
Uh-huh.
And that's not what happened for me.
Yeah.
It was one gradual step. One little breadcrumb led to something else, and that little breadcrumb led to something else, and that little breadcrumb led to something else. And I went from saying to myself, these are the only skills that you have. There are no other options for you, to being opened up. That podcast opened me wide up to the idea, just the concept that I could build the life that I want. And then I started looking for opportunities. Well, what could I do?
Mm.
What could be possible for me? And because I just opened just a tiny little bit, every step that I took, I was guided here. But I didn't get the full picture until like a month ago.
Yeah.
It took like 5 years for me to be slowly guided here. And so it's not necessarily like the full picture is going to drop into your imagination and that's going to be the life-changing thing that sets you on a new course for a new sense of existence. It's just an idea. It's just a question. It's just a reflection. And sitting with the discomfort of potentially taking action on it where you wouldn't have before, just doing that alone is going to open you up to 1,000 more avenues that you wouldn't have had access to before because you were
Mhm.
choosing something different now.
I want to highlight something about your story of listening to that part of the podcast because so many people could hear that quote that you can create whatever life you want. I mean, we hear that messaging, I think, a lot, anyways, in today's society, especially if you're in the realm of spirituality and personal development. And there was a significance to how you reacted to that because obviously there was a part of you that doubted it. It didn't fully see that it was, you didn't fully trust that it was true. But regardless of that, you were open to proving that wrong.
Yes.
There was a part of you that really actively wanted to prove it wrong. And that's why you went on the path that you did. Whereas I think a lot of us are bombarded with that message all the time, and without even realizing it, we completely shut ourselves off to that idea. We're like, that sounds nice, but not for me. Or that sounds nice, but that's for later. Or that sounds nice, but like, I'm too busy to think about that right now. And they just completely close themselves off to that expansion and that possibility of the future. And I think a big part of it is because it is scary. to imagine, to even have to think about what I would even want if it was true that I could create whatever I want. That's intimidating. And I think we confirm that a lot with ideas around how we're supposed to be humble and selfless, and we're like what we want shouldn't really matter that much, and like we should just be grateful for what we have, which there's wisdom in those messaging as well, but we use it as an excuse to deny ourselves of our calling and what feels really authentic for us. And so it's interesting to note that you were in a place in that moment to be able to even recognize that you doubted it, like that you heard the message, you had an automatic interpretation of it, that it wasn't true, or that that was crazy to even think that you could create whatever you wanted. And then in that recognition that that's how you interpreted it, you were like, I don't know if I want to interpret it this way. Like, I don't know if I want to own this as my reality and as my truth, because the idea of upgrading what's true for me to be this idea that I actually can create whatever I want, that sounds better than staying in the comfort of this familiarity of I can't create whatever I want. I just have to, make ends meet with whatever I have, and what just follow the path that's been cut for me.
Well, I distinctly remember telling myself, well, this is not the reality I want, but I don't know what I want. And I think that that's where we get stuck is that we don't know and then we freak out because the assumption is that, well, you should know, come up with something. And that's not true. That's not necessarily true. If you're open, that's where the imagination comes in. Just being open to daydreaming, being open to imagining what could be true for you, what could be possible for you, and knowing that the answer might come gradually over the course of time. And some steps are required in between point A and point Z, which is that you must change. You must be the person capable of taking whatever idea comes to you and bringing it into reality, or being capable of even receiving the idea in the first place. So there's an evolutionary process to this too, which let's not like downplay because that's sort of the magic. The magic isn't in bringing something into reality. The magic is your transformation.
Yes.
And I went from someone who thought that I was out of options because I went to school to study that thing, and that's all I knew. And over the course of 5 years, I developed a whole new set of skills. It just required an openness about me to be able to get there. And I distinctly remember this one meditation where I was asked to visualize myself in 5 years from now in my business and what my day looked like. And this image of me dropped in that was drastically different. What I did with my day, how I spent my day was very different. And I was like, where did that come from? I have no idea who that person is. I don't identify with them at all. There's something super magical about it. And I have
Yeah.
no idea how to do that. But what had to come first was the vision. And I
Yes.
didn't have to know. I just had to be open to wanting to eventually get there and then trusting that I would, as long as I kept that intention top of mind, because intentionality is super important with that, which we can also
Yes.
explore as well. But again, the misconception is that you have to have all the answers, and you're not going to.
Right. Like you were talking about, it kind of gets fed to you in breadcrumbs, and it does. And maybe there's a wisdom and an intelligence to that, because the state that our mind is currently in might just not even be capable of imagining what's actually possible. And so we have to start with baby steps. And this conversation is bringing me back, way back to my times as a personal trainer at L2 Fitness. Shout out Landon and Laura Pobrin. when I was actually employed by them at their gym. Um, this is probably the first time I ever had an experience of imagining or even thinking about what I wanted. Because up until this point, I had went to school, became a personal trainer, and knew that I loved that. I was definitely passionate about it. And then I just kind of conformed the vision that I had for my life and for my future based on what I just assumed that was supposed to look like. And so I was just trying to fill my schedule literally as much as possible with clients. I'm like, I'll take all the clients anytime, anywhere. I just want to be busy. I want to be making as much money as possible, and I want to be doing this work that I know that I love. And I remember Landon and Laura, when I first started working for them, they gave me this homework of creating a fake schedule for myself as like just literally like daydreaming about what my ideal schedule would look like. And I remember just feeling so awkward with that exercise, as funny as that is to me now, because I'm like, that sounds great. I should redo that. But it was so uncomfortable, weirdly, because I'm just like, I struggled with it because I'm like, I don't want to put anything else here because like what if I need to put a client there and I want to keep everything open in case like well sometimes clients might only be able to work with me on Sundays and some clients might only be able to see me on the weekends and stuff and they're like hold on like just you're not cursing yourself with this exercise to where like you're only ever going to be able to like now fill your schedule with these limitations that you've created. This is purely just for you to like know what would feel good for you to have. And I'm like, okay. So I made this schedule and I in my fake schedule, I gave myself Mondays off. And I was like, Having having a day off would be amazing. Like, I just thought that was so like woo, like if I could have that and still like, make enough money and have clients be okay with the fact that I'd sometimes have a day off, then that would be cool. And that was like the first time that I like tiptoed into realizing that having time for myself was important because I had completely neglected and abandoned that, just assuming that that wasn't allowed. If I was going to be a personal trainer, I just need to conform to everyone else's lives if I'm going to be able to be successful and be adaptable to other people's schedules. And then over many years, many years, that evolved to me recognizing that I love having a lot of free time, a lot of it, and having very clear boundaries around when I'm available to meet with clients and to work and when I don't is what feels so enriching and nourishing and authentic to me. And when I'm not aligned with that, when I'm not following it, it just feels really off. Feels like I'm not actually living. I'm just like following a list of rules and things and checking things off to-do lists in order to like survive. It literally feels like survival mode. And the contrast of like Kelly in circa 2017 when she was like, I'll work every day, always, for the rest of my life if it means that clients will want to work with me. And that's what I want. And like genuinely believing that was what I wanted to now being like, if I could just have clients work with me 3 days a week and then have like the rest of my time to like do what I want and be creative and flow and like maybe work some other times, but like just doing things that feel good for me, that would be my ideal. But it was a long journey of being able to recognize that's what I wanted and to be able to own that shamelessly without making that wrong because it doesn't fit the mold of what we've been told we're supposed to do and want in order to be successful and a valuable contributor to society.
Yeah. Young, sweet, innocent little Kelly, she just wanted to feel like she was successful and that she had
Mhm.
this like roster of clients that loved to come to her and that, saw her as flexible and accommodating and really enjoyed training with her because of how,
Hardworking.
yeah. And
Yeah.
like I don't think that that's wrong to want those things, but you can have those things through a limitless amount of options. And we just tend to only look at what's right in front of us and that what's known as our doorway into that, even if it doesn't feel good. And even if we're giving up all the things that we want, underneath it, if on the surface it looks right, then we tend to just go with it.
100%.
And something that I think also gets lost in the shuffle is that, and I'm coming at this from the spiritual perspective, is that we tend to think we have to do it alone, or we forget that we don't have to. And we actually do have a support system.
Mhm.
We do have a team of dedicated beings of light who are just like on standby, waiting with their briefcase, their pen and paper for you to give them a job to do. But they
Right.
can't do it if you don't ask for their help. And again, we tend to think that our human brain is the way that we show up in the world and create things. And your brain is just your organ. It's just another thing that processes how you identify with yourself inside of this reality. But if you want to create from your imagination, it's not going to be coming from your mind. It's going to be coming through your channel from something greater than you. And so you can set intentions. So I think intentionality is like a side conversation to this general topic where having a sense of direction for what you want, regardless of how it shows up for you, because that's not always something that you can predict. But if you
Uh-huh.
have an idea of what you sort of want generally, I want to feel X and I'd like to experience Y, and I'm asking for my team to help me with this. And I'm giving you permission to help me bring this into my reality. And then just be completely open
Hmm.
without any attachment to the how. That is where you're going to bring imagination into reality, is through that intentionality of this is the general direction of where I want to go and how I want it to feel. Give me action. Like send the people into my life, send me the circumstances that I can take action on to then move the needle forward.
Hmm. I think that trap that we get caught up in when we start to lean into the unknown in the realm of intuition and creativity and imagination is that because it feels so inherently unsafe, we tend to put our analytical brain on mind to create some certainty around it. And that's when we have these really rigid ideas of what it is supposed to look like if we follow the imagination. And then that sets us up for failure in a lot of ways because then we might take action on an inspired idea or follow our intuition in some way. And then as soon as we don't have the expected proof that it's going the way that we thought that it was supposed to go, then we're like, see, it doesn't work. And we freak out and we might completely abandon the idea way before it had a chance of actually unfolding into what it was meant to be. And we're never going to be able to know what it was meant to be until we're there. And that can feel terrifying. But in a lot of ways, it's also really exciting. And I think we talked about this in our very first episode around how what we want is limited by our past. Like what we think is best for us, what we think the best case scenario outcome is inherently going to be limited by what our mind has seen as possible. And why would we want that? If there's a whole realm that we can't even see as possible, that is so much better.
What my guides are telling me right now is that that paradigm no longer works because of where we're ascending to, where you're not going to be able to do it on your own and you're not going to be able to force it because the the vibration that is required in order for you to create the thing that you really want to requires that you trust, requires that you surrender, and requires that you do more of the inner work, like sitting with your doubts and your fears, because ultimately, what is being asked to be birthed through us requires that, where it didn't
Mhm.
before. Like, the whole kind of planet is ascending. And so what is going to be birthed through us is going to be something that hasn't existed before. And what that's going to require of us is to operate in a way that we haven't before. And so you're going to be asked to be very uncomfortable for a while until that feels that until you can trust that a little bit more than you could.
Mhm. 100%. We are
Yeah.
constantly being stretched like little pieces outside of our comfort zone until that starts to become safe just from the sheer familiarity of it. And then as soon as we feel comfortable, the universe is like, okay, uncomfortable again.
If you're on the spiritual path right now, you're here to do some major transformational work. Um, and so that might require foregoing the physical manifestation of what you want for a little bit longer because the internal growth required to bring it to life is going to take longer because there's more room to grow.
Mhm.
Does that make sense?
And I think a lot of people might hear that and be like, why can't I? Like, other people have the thing though, and they're not doing the inner work. I know
Are
I
they
have that.
happy? Are they
And that's the thing.
fulfilled?
That's the thing.
You don't
Yeah,
know that they are. And so the traditional definition of success is not what we're talking about here. That's a whole separate thing. We tend to conflate the two.
sure. Yeah.
What we're talking about is using your imagination to create something from you that allows you to feel really good inside of it. It doesn't necessarily have to make you a lot of money. It could, but it might take longer to do that just depending on what it is. And maybe that's not what you want.
Mhm.
Maybe that's not what's going to make you happy. Or maybe there's like a different avenue that's going to facilitate that for you that you keep closing yourself off from because you're told, well, this is how it's supposed to go. So I'm being told that patience is required with this because it requires a paradigm shift. But when
Yeah.
you can start to see that your biggest, I guess, what am I trying to say? Your biggest asset is your ability to open up to all possibilities. And that's only going to come through your imagination.
Hmm. That reminds me of a side aspect of this conversation I was thinking of earlier that I guess we could tie in around how we tend to use our imagination in the I'm gonna say the word negative, like in a negative way, where like a lot of our suffering comes from us pouring our attention into the like the possibilities of the future that we don't want, like anxiety. And we're constantly thinking about what's gonna go wrong and what's not going to go right. And so if someone is listening to this and thinking like they have no experience being able to tap into creativity and into their inspiration and imagination in some ways, you probably do. You just haven't channeled it in the ways that we're communicating is available for you, which is that you can start to, like Kyle Cease has this exercise that he's very I was going to say famous for. I don't think he's famous for it, but people in his community are very well
We're going
versed
to
in.
say he's famous for
He's totally famous for it.
it.
And it's called It's Totally Possible is the name of the exercise where you just either by yourself, but usually you do it with a partner, where you just go on these riffs for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour, even. You can challenge yourself to that, where you're just constantly going back and forth around what is totally possible, starting every sentence with, it's totally possible that, but you're supposed to frame it in the realm of um like what you actually want, what's positively possible to get us out of the thinking that we're normally in, which is it's totally possible. Everything's going to fall apart and this person isn't going to like me and I'm going to lose a job or I'm not going to get the raise or like the blah, 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 like something bad might happen with my finances and whatever. We're normally in that realm of thinking of things that are totally possible. And so what you find when you do this exercise is that it feels really awkward at first. You feel like you're just stumbling over your words, like you're a baby deer learning to walk for the first time. But then as you get more into the pocket of it, then all of these wild ideas that you have never accessed before start to come through. And you get little insights of like, oh, I could do that. Or, oh, I never thought about asking this person about this. Or, and you start to not only imagine like how things could work out for you and how life could be friendly, which is a good vibe to be in more often, but it also can be quite practical because your mind starts accessing all of these possibilities and then connects them with tangible things that you could actually start doing to align yourself with those possibilities that you have accessed.
And notice where you immediately question if it's possible and where you immediately limit what could be possible. And notice that it takes time to give yourself permission to think big.
It totally does.
And there's nothing wrong with that. That's sort of the beauty of the entire concept is learning how to slowly give yourself the permission to believe that you could be possible of so much more than you ever gave yourself credit for.
Mhm. And it's okay if that feels scary or if there's a part of you that doesn't want to acknowledge that it's true, but can you stretch yourself to sit with that reality a little bit longer and just try to imagine what's exciting about that? Like, what's genuinely really exciting about this idea that you could have it better than that you've ever given yourself the ability to imagine? That life could be so much sweeter, more peaceful, more joyful, more fulfilling than you have ever given yourself permission to believe is possible. That is exciting
It's
in
so
so many
exciting.
ways. Yeah,
Is there anything else that you want to add to this conversation that you feel like we haven't touched on?
I don't think so. Do you?
I'm just being guided to really ask the question, if you believe that you came here to experience what it's like to be human, then don't you want to see what's possible for you while you're here? And
Mm,
if the answer is no, can that be okay too? So
right.
there's no pressure to push yourself before you're ready, but just being able to anchor into play again in life, which is ultimately what imagination is, can feel very elevating and lighten the load that we tend to carry on our shoulders from day to day. And perhaps that's the beauty inside of having the gift of imagination is being able to take yourself out of all of the heaviness that we tend to carry with us and remind yourself that you can let that go from time to time. You don't have to carry that all the time.
Beautifully said. Thank you for that.
Thank you so much for listening, everybody. If you thought this was interesting, we would love to hear from you. We'd also love to hear from you if you have any anecdotes about this. I don't know why I was asked to say that. If there's something
Yeah,
on your mind with regard to this conversation that you'd like to share with us, email us. We want to hear
please
from
do.
you.
Yeah.
madness.meaning@gmail.com.
Ooh, ooh. Slide in the DMs.
Slide into our DMs and tell us your life story.
Yeah, we love that.
Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next week.